that's their big effort right now.
Oh my goodness, that's a big job. That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like having the expertise available.
Yeah.
If you're gonna do it yourself, I'm like, that's great. But you're gonna, somewhere along the line, you're gonna just need to say, walk me through this.
Yeah.
And you've got it right there, which is a wonderful gift.
Yeah.
Huge.
Well, the other thing that goes out up there is the county inspects it every step of the way. And so they feel pretty confident.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's what I learned. In our house, it's like, oh my gosh, it's not an inspection. There's inspections all along
Right.
the way.
Yeah.
We have to be inspecting for that. I'm like, okay, we're gonna come for an inspection for that.
Yeah.
Really interested in learning.
Yeah.
They'll be in this winter.
Yeah, they'll be in this
Is
winter.
it the property next to the bus? Are they on the property?
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. So does the bus go away? Keep it as a playhouse?
Yeah.
Well, for their sake, they make an ally of the inspector.
They seem to us. Yeah. I was just telling Sarah, they're really these ultra friendly people. That's not easy with your family. That's how they figured out how to do this. My daughter hired out for a couple of summers to help them do it. And then, when they need help along the way with some part of it, they have people do it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Because the inspectors can hear worse than these guys. Luckily on this one, we got rid of one guy who was always period. Anyway, that's fine, but they turned into outliers.
Well, I think that's what they
And that's a great thing for me.
In fact, they were completely different looking.
Alright, we have stream started.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'll take more beans anytime.
Oh, okay. I just gave some to our dinner guest last night. But okay, good.
This is so that, because believe it or not, especially when you're not super familiar with technology in general, it doesn't start exactly when you say it. It can start organic. They think that they're doing something wrong. So I try to be consistent with starting the streams on the time. If you start the worship screen up, usually like 5 minutes to whenever the boys are. Whenever the boys are getting together. The stream has been running while you all have been chit-chatting in the background. But that's okay. I'm not gonna, I it's one of those supposed to be comprehensible versus comprehensive, two different things. Sorry. There's lots of words in French they're called faux amis, which is the fake friends, which sound very similar to English words, but they don't mean the same thing. And so I often find myself now saying English words and second guessing whether or not they mean the thing that they think comprehensible, right? Given my conjugation. Anyways, translators are making choices between what the word
Jesse?
Yeah.
As a side note, I remember back in the 70s, there was a scientist, I cannot tell you who he was, but I remember him saying, it might have been, saying, the more you dwell into science, the more you believe.
Well, probably for prosthetic.
Yeah. He said you can't help but believe that there's something out there, because when you get that deep into science.
Well, Einstein actually articulated stuff like that.
And it could have been him, yeah.
I can't remember, I'm not going to do the quote justice. It was something about immersing yourself in the complexity of the universe. If he was, and again, this tends to get taken out of context, like everything does. He wasn't necessarily saying that the more you see, understand the universe, the more you believe in God. He was just saying, you know, the more that you get, the more you dwell in the complexity of the universe, the more that you understand how much of it is beyond your comprehension.
God doesn't play dice with you.
God doesn't play dice with the universe. Although, according to Douglas Adams, it was a big mistake. Did you ever read Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? The preface, the opening paragraph, is some of the best satire in the world. It's like, I'm not going to quote it right, but the opening line is something like along the lines of, in the beginning, God created the universe, and pretty much everybody regards it as a huge mistake. It's satire. He has a book called Diner at the End of the Universe, or something like that. Like Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Yeah. It's great. Let's talk words. Okay, so we're going to follow up on a word that we were talking about last week, which is evangelical. And we had a great conversation about this. So what we talked about last week is what does it mean now? We looked at Merriam-Webster definition, which I'm going to just repeat real quick to put us in context. There are five definitions under evangelical. One, of, relating to, or being in agreement with the Christian gospel, especially as it is presented in the four gospels. Two, Protestant. So evangelical and Protestant are synonyms. Three, emphasizing salvation, which, spoiler alert, that's going to be our word, one of our words for today, salvation. And by the way, I made a promise. Well, I didn't make a promise, but I made a commitment. Well, I guess that's a promise. Last week that I failed to live up to this week, which was to get all those words on paper and to give you a handout. I remember to do it while I was walking the dog this morning. The reason I forgot is because I read lots of things and I didn't write it down. I have to write it down.
You're too young for that.
So, I am not. I hate to break it to you, Linda. I've always been this way.
Oh.
I'm a lifelong airhead. It's just the way my brain doesn't work. This is one of my major assumptions. Definition number three, emphasizing salvation by faith. This is such a mouthful. Emphasizing salvation by faith in the atoning death of Jesus Christ through personal conversion, the authority of Scripture, and the importance of preaching as contrast with ritual. I just can't help but imagine Sure.
So therefore, that's a conundrum.
Articulate my.
Well, so the good news,
I was about to say articulate my butt.
right. Well, I won't do that. Yes. The but is that you're saying faith. And the reality is it doesn't have to be faith.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've nailed it. This is the asterisk that Luther puts into his, which is, well, actually the thing that saves you is that, well, the thing that saves you is faith. And then Luther proceeds to write 56 volumes articulating why faith isn't something that you do, but it's a gift that you receive. And yeah, go ahead, Chip.
It's sort of like living your life in gratitude for that, or living your life to try to arrive at that.
Right. Well, I agree with that part, living your life, but that's evading the central point.
You're absolutely right.
The central point is you don't have to have faith to be saved. It's already there. Faith is great because it helps you live your life, but that's not necessary.
Okay. You are saying that as a statement,
Yeah.
which is absolutely, I fully support that. I think for a lot of people that's a question, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Right? It was a question for Luther, right? Luther was absolutely against the idea that you needed to, go to confession, say the Lord's Prayer, do penance, buy indulgences, whatever, insert task here in order to be saved. He was absolutely against that. Luther began to embrace this idea that, okay, if you don't need to do any of that, is there anything you need to do? And the answer he arrived at was no. But Luther struggled with that no. Because when you say no, there's nothing, that the good news of Jesus Christ is that Jesus Christ died for creation, that creation might be saved, redeemed, which we're going to talk about before the end of the day. Then you're presented with this issue of but, which you're absolutely right, there's a but in there. But isn't there something? Because the world we live in, we encounter people, as we might articulate, people of faith. We just talked about this, and people not of faith. And it can be really tough to delve into that question of, well, does that mean that Jesus died for them too? That they are saved too, right? That people of different faiths or not of our faith are also saved. And you've hit at probably the most controversial topic in Christianity. And I would say that every conflict between every denomination, non-denomination or otherwise, goes back to that. Is everybody embraced into this? Is almost everybody? And if not, how do you tell who is and who isn't? And this is it. Because when you add, here are the steps you need to follow to get to heaven, we have a very clear-cut road. We have a very clear-cut way of saying in and out.
Right. But that's the human foibles coming involved.
And this is the question.
Right.
This is the question.
I asked myself that question 50 years ago. And it came down to one thing. It's like, okay, Jesus lived in a very small portion of the globe.
Yeah. Very small.
Very small portion of the globe. His influence was bigger, but still small. What happened to all the people that didn't live even close to that?
Yeah.
Did God just ignore them? Or
Yeah.
did God somehow come to them? And then the question came down, okay, if it's an all-powerful, all-knowing, and loving God, why wouldn't he go to all peoples of the earth? They interpreted what he said differently.
Yeah.
But if you go for the similarities and not the differences, they're there.
Yeah.
And so therefore, why would you then suggest that just because we're looking at our perspective, everyone else is wrong? If you go from the standpoint here that salvation or being with God is what it's all about, why do you exclude everyone else?
So this is such a beautiful irony. Andy, you're going to appreciate this.
Well, isn't that God died for me? Jesus died for us. Not so much our finding him, he found us. And it's the way we react to that matters. And evangelical, to me, always meant getting out and spreading the word so that other people will know, because how else will they know?
And
Oh, struggle with e-tickets?
Yeah.
Every day.
Every day. It gives me anxiety. It gives me anxiety. My great fear is that I will show up to the show and they won't let me in because it's supposedly on my phone, right, with a QR code, but there's nothing there. That's an image on a screen. Anybody can have that image. How do you know it's me that I purchased that ticket? I want to go to the show, right? So
Same thing with airline tickets.
Here, totally. Right? The fact that, and I love watching the Gen Z people navigate airlines now. I don't pre-check in for anything, right? Because in my experience, you check in when you show up at the airport and they confirm for you that yes, you are on this flight. I don't want to check in ahead of time. I'm not there yet. I don't know why I have this issue. But it's this idea of I want a boarding pass. They always ask me now, do you want to print your boarding pass? Yes, because I want my boarding pass. I don't know what the image is that's on your screen, but that's not my boarding pass. I want my boarding pass. And the hilarious thing about it is like, they don't care about it. They don't need it. You're in the computer. If you're not in the computer, there's a problem. You're in the computer, right? They know how to get you on the plane. I need my boarding pass. Anyways.
Then you go back to faith.
It is. It is. Absolutely. I have faith in the airline system. But it's that I need something. And I think that extends the human experience. Is that, okay, I've heard the good news that Jesus died for me, for all people. Give me my ticket. Can I get will call? I'm happy with will call, but
Well,
give me my ticket.
isn't that related somewhat to you get a certificate when you're baptized?
You do. Yeah. But what's funny
But
is,
what about those people who don't get
we had
baptized?
somebody call the church recently who wanted a copy of their baptismal certificate from 1986.
Yeah.
Something like this. And I'm like, number one, we don't keep copies of certificates. That's yours. It means something, but it doesn't actually mean
anything.
anything. It's just, it's the same as your marriage certificate, right? There's a marriage certificate and there's a marriage license. The marriage license is the only thing that the state cares about. The certificate is for you to hang on your wall. And I have to tell this to every couple that I marry. I'm like, this means nothing. This is absolutely meaningless, right? If I don't sign this correctly and mail it into the county within 5 business days, that's a piece of paper, right? So that license, that's important. Okay. Anyway, sorry. We got 5 minutes. Sorry. Good conversation. Good conversation. To be fair, I spent probably a good 20 minutes talking about a YouTube channel, so I apologize. I better get out of that. That's all I'm going to say. Let's talk about salvation. This is going to be, let's intro our word for next week, because this is the word that came up a bunch today. And by the way, I'm kind of like picking the words that we talk about right now. If you're like, I don't feel like talking about this, let's talk about something else. Again, bring your words every week. I'm A-okay with calling an audible and doing something else. Doesn't matter. Salvation. What's your experience of that word? Good? Just quick poll. How many of you have heard, hear that word and immediately get warm fuzzies? Okay, kind of one sort of thing. How many of you hear that word and get a little bit anxious? Some half hands. How many of you hear that word and it doesn't mean much to you? More hands. Yeah, there's probably another category that some of you fit in. This is a tough one. Okay? It's not quite so biased in our modern language as the word like evangelical, because evangelical is had been claimed by people. But Dion, how many times have you been beaten over the head with this one? And told that it's a good thing, right? Okay.
But again, it's in the eye of the beholder.
Eye of
It's
the
used as a power play.
Yeah.
It's I'm right, you're wrong.
Absolutely. Who is saved? Who is saved?
Well, what I don't like about it is that the entire premise is God created creation,
Yeah.
and all of it is in.
Yeah. Original sin.
And then there's a way to not do what God has designed.
Yeah.
I don't like it at all.
And let me clarify something here. This just came up. I was talking to somebody about baptism, and
issue, of course, is religion, quote unquote, is a human construct.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, it's fraught with all of the humanism that's brought into it, all the negatives, all the power plays, all that stuff. But if you go back to what actually it's all based on, it's not there.
Yeah. I would put it this way, religion is to our relationship with God as marital counseling is to our relationship with our spouse. And that's not a good, not necessarily 100% metaphor, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Religion is a human construct. It is the ritualization of behavior by which we define how we relate to God.
Right, an example, and I'm just curious, because I'm going to say something I'm probably going to be in error about.
Let's talk about this concerning.
Right, but anyway, where does Jesus highlight the exact order of service? Jesus, that's it. I mean,
Well, it's not the Bible.
right, but where?
Well,
So,
sort of.
right. Well, the Hebrews had some kind of a construct, but Jesus saying this is what you should do. It's rarely talked about, and there is no quote order. But yet we based our whole sermon on an order that he never asked us.
And I would go one step further, which is to say that by and large, Jesus never actually ordains worship as being essential to the practice of disciple.
Right.
Being a disciple of Jesus is figuratively about following Jesus. And we can elaborate on that, right? Like that's not a mono thing. That's actually why we get together. And this is the irony of it, is that one of the reasons that we worship, that we gather, is to work through this topic of what does it mean to follow Jesus? Especially in a changing
this again is my opinion. I accept salvation as a gift
Yep.
because as a human, I can never comprehend it.
That's a great place to be. That's a great place to be.
If I try to start thinking about it, to me, that's a sin.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you're articulating something that I can totally get on board with. And I think, to go back to our earlier conversation, I think one of the ways that we in the 21st century could really alleviate a lot of our conflicts is to kind of set aside the hyperbolic rhetoric. This is, take my words in context. It's not all about heaven or hell, okay? That in fact, the majority of what Jesus is encouraging us to do is not about going to paradise. It's about the consequences of our behavior in this space, right? So this is what we're going to talk about next week, by the way, is the context of this word. So we'll go to 10:30, just because I want to read you the definitions of salvation. And why is this such an important word, and why is it so confusing? What we're going to learn next week, we're going to get a spoiler, we'll actually talk about it, is that this word is primarily used in Koine Greek as salvation from a specific harm or danger, meaning you are saved from there.